Alright guys, this is video 2 for Unit 3. We're going to be talking about our brain today. So let's get going. Again, any study of biology and human behavior must begin with the brain. And again, the brain with our spinal cord makes up our central nervous system. So our brains control everything we do, from involuntary actions like breathing to calculating complicated mathematical equations. Through years of study and research, scientists have identified a number of regions of the brain, each of which serves a unique function, and through many functions overlap the different areas. The brain is made up of 3 major regions. You have the hindbrain, the midbrain, and the forebrain. Located in the lower part of the brain, the hindbrain regulates vital functions, and we're going to come back to that in just a minute. But in ancient times, people did not attribute human psychological processes like thinking to the working of the brain. We just didn't have that knowledge at the time. But people believed the body was inhabited by souls or demons. So if you were sick or something like that, then they believed that you'd been possessed somehow. Aristotle thought that our soul resided in our heart, but today we know, thanks to medical science, that the mind, our consciousness, dwells within the brain. So, the hindbrain is located in the lower part of the brain, and it regulates our vital functions. It includes the medulla oblongata, which regulates functions like respiration and heart rate, the pons, which is involved in motor function, and the cerebellum, which is necessary for balance and coordination. Just above the hindbrain is the midbrain, and this is largely responsible for controlling our visual and auditory systems. And together, the medulla oblongata, the pons, and the midbrain are called the brain stem. The midbrain also controls the reticular activating system, and this is an important system that helps us control our attention, our sleep, our arousal, and our alertness. So the reticular activating system is very important. The largest part of the brain is the forebrain, and this is located, as the name suggests, in the front part of the brain. And it allows humans to engage in complex mental processes. And part of the forebrain is the cerebrum, or the cerebral cortex, and this controls memory, perception, language, and emotion. And the cerebral cortex is divided into 2 hemispheres, the left and right hemispheres, and this is connected by the corpus callosum. Each hemisphere can be divided into 4 identical lobes, and we're going to talk about those. But the cerebral cortex is what we are talking, like when you think about the brain, just in general terms and what a brain looks like, you're thinking about the cerebral cortex. You know what this is, you just have never known the formal medical term for it. So, and these are some important parts of the brain. You have the thalamus, and this is a relay station for sensory stimulation. So this is all our senses, and like when we touch, when we taste, when we see, all those senses go through the thalamus. The hypothalamus is vital to the regulation of body temperature. We store nutrients there and various aspects of motivation and emotion. It's involved in hunger, thirst, sexual behavior, caring for offspring, and aggression. So the hypothalamus is an incredibly important structure of our brain. The limbic system is involved in learning and memory, emotion, hunger, sex, and aggression. Within the limbic system, you have some structures called the amygdala, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. The amygdala is heavily involved in aggression and frustration. The cerebrum makes up about 70% of the brain's weight and is where most of our conscious and intellectual activities take place. So, I'm going to click on this for you so we can see. The average human adult brain has more than 10 billion cells, and although the brain makes up about 2 to 3% of our body weight, it requires 20% of our oxygen supply. So, I don't have to tell you how important the brain actually is. So, the human brain enables people to think, feel, move, and use their senses. The brain is made up of many parts that work together to perform these functions. So we're going to talk a little bit about it. Again, you have a hindbrain, you have your cerebellum, largest part of the hindbrain. Medulla controls breathing, heart rate, and blood pressure. And then your pons helps regulate attention, sleep, and alertness. Your midbrain contains your reticular activating system, and that's a very important system that helps control a lot of things. And then your forebrain. You have your cerebral cortex, your hypothalamus, thalamus, and limbic system. So again, feel free to pause, go back, whatever you need to do to get this information. And we're going to go over this and over this and over this. So please don't think that, this is all you're going to get. When we talk about sensory and motor areas, we're talking here about particularly the frontal lobe. The frontal lobe is located immediately behind the forehead, and it controls reasoning, problem solving, speech, and movement. And above and behind the frontal lobes are the parietal lobes, and that's right here. And they modulate recognition and perception. At the back of the head, you have the occipital lobes, which regulate vision, and near the temples, you have the temporal lobes, and they're involved in hearing, memory, and speech. And then you have the primary somatosensory system, or cortex, and this receives information. It's in the parietal lobe, and the primary motor cortex, and that's also, that's in the frontal lobe, and it controls movement. So when you see the word movement, you should know motor. And here's a little blurb about the left and right hemispheres, and we're going to talk in detail about this. And language function, we're also going to talk in detail about that. So I just wanted to show you that. Let's go back to our PowerPoint. Again, the cerebral cortex has a left and a right side, and each side is called a hemisphere. The corpus callosum is the structure that connects the two, and we're going to talk about that. Some odd brain facts. Neurons create and send more messages than all the phones in the entire world. They could power a 10-watt light bulb. Sensory neurons send information to the brain at a speed of more than 150 miles per hour. But guys, 150 miles per hour is, even though that's very fast, it's still much slower than the speed of light or the speed of sound or the speed of electricity. Motor neurons relay information at a speed of more than 200 miles an hour. And like I said, that's still much slower than like a computer processor. But our brains work slower than computers do because our brains are so much more complex. The adult brain weighs about 3 pounds. If the cerebral cortex, was unfolded, it would cover a typical classroom desk. Gross. The average human brain is about 75% water, and during the first month of life, the number of synapses in an infant brain increases from 50 trillion to 1 quadrillion. So those are some really cool facts. Senses and motor behavior. The occipital lobe is the primary visual area of the cerebral cortex. And when we talk about the occipital lobe, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you've ever had your feet knocked out from under you and fallen on your back and hit the back of your head and saw stars, then you just damaged your occipital lobe. That's why you see stars, because it controls your vision. That's why you see stars. The temporal lobe is hearing. It's near your ears. It makes sense. And it's the auditory area of our cortex. Messages received from the skin sensory receptors are projected to the sensory cortex in the parietal lobe, and those sensations include warmth, cold, touch, and pain. And we're going to do some more stuff with senses when we get to that unit. The association areas of the cerebral cortex shape information into something meaningful, and that means that for example, the frontal lobe functions as the brain's executive center, but association areas provide the core of the working memory. So the frontal region of the brain receives visual, auditory, and other kinds of memories, and then other association areas make possible the psychological functions of language. So our brain, meaning association areas, mean that this area might be associated with something. It might, the left side of your brain is often called, it's the left hemisphere. It's associated with certain types of thinking and certain types of learning, but your brain works as a unified whole. Some neat facts about language. For nearly all right-handed people, language functions are based in the left hemisphere. And that can change for left-handed people. Language functions are also based in the left hemisphere for about 2 out of 3 left-handed people, which means that for some left-handed people, they don't have these language functions that I'm about to talk about. Wernicke's area is an area of your brain in the left hemisphere that is associated, or it's named for the psychologist that discovered it, but it connects sights and sounds. And so when this area is damaged, people find it difficult to actually understand speech. So you could speak to them, but they don't understand what you're saying. Broca's area, however, again, is named for the psychologist that discovered it, and it is involved in the actual forming of the language that comes out of your mouth. When this area is damaged, people speak slowly and use very simple sentences. The left hemisphere is very literal, it's very logical, it's good at problem solving and mathematical computation, whereas the right hemisphere is more concerned with imagination, art, feelings, and spatial relations. The right hemisphere is our, hippie cousin, whereas the left hemisphere is our nerdy friend. The split brain operations have taught psychologists much of what they know about left and right hemisphere functioning. Split brain is when the actual corpus callosum has been severed surgically to help patients find some relief from seizure activity. And so split brain, we're going to do some more activity with split brains, but it's a really neat concept to study. We study the brains in many ways, or the brain in many ways. We've always realize the importance of understanding the brain, the nervous system, and functioning of neurons to fully understand human behavior. But until recently, we really had no effective way to study the brain. Early methods included surgery, ablation, and stimulation. And today, these procedures are typically reserved for test animals and patients with neurological disorders. Surgically removing or destroying a section of the brain and then observing the behavior helped early scientists draw conclusions about what functions are regulated by that part of the brain. And ablation is the burning or freezing of brain tissue, and this creates lesions on the brain and upsets the functioning of the tissue. The effects of the ablation were thought to indicate the role of that particular area of the brain in which the procedure took place. Additionally, the direct stimulation of parts of the brain with tiny electrical currents help scientists learn about their functions. Today, researchers use a range of techniques to study the brain and its functions. And most ways that we learn about the brain is through accidents. Nobody's going to offer up their healthy human brain for, poking and prodding and surgery. So when people are in car accidents or any other sort of traumatic brain injury scenario, that's when we learn a lot about the brain. Again, lesions are when scientists study a brain by cutting, removing, or destroying a part of it. And again, this is used on lab animals. One of the earliest modern methods developed to record brain's electrical activity is the electroencephalogram, and this is an EEG. And an EEG uses electrodes that are placed on the scalp to record and monitor brain waves. EEGs help scientists associate specific brainwave patterns with particular mental states and functions. Brain imaging facilitates the diagnosis of brain damage or other neurological abnormalities. So in a computerized axial tomography, which is a CAT scan, a three-dimensional snapshot of the brain is created using low-dose X-rays. X-rays are aimed at the head from various angles, and then computers measure the amount of radiation absorbed by that brain tissue. And they use those measurements to create cross-sectional images of the brain. And less invasive than a CAT scan is an MRI, and this provides a more detailed image of the brain. The subject is exposed to a magnetic field which causes atoms in the brain to signal. And measuring these signals enables MRI technology to compile a visual image of the brain structure. An fMRI stands for a functional MRI, and this detects metabolic changes in the brain as it actually performs different functions. And then a PET scan is a positron emission tomography, and it reveals the brain at work. In a PET scan, the subject is injected with small amounts of harmless radioactive substance, and it becomes concentrated in areas where the brain is most active. And PET imagery indicates the location of this radioactivity, and by extension, which part of the brains are used as it carries out various tasks. So this is a good graphic showing you how they study the human brain. You can pause it right here. And then this is just a little image of a lab rat, poor thing. And researchers use lab rats oftentimes, and that kind of goes back to ethics. Again, we only use animals for testing when it's medically necessary, or when it's necessary. The benefits outweigh the risk. So that's the end of our video today. Thank